Hello, everyone, and welcome to Healthy at Work. My name is Catherine Wilcox, a workplace health specialist with a big passion for helping people thrive at work. From the home office to the corporate office, from the assembly line to the front line, I've got you covered here for your healthiest life at work. Now let's dive into today's show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Healthy at Work. I'm your host, Catherine, and this week I'm joined by a very special guest to have a conversation about menopause and your mental health at work. This week to the show, I'm really pleased to welcome Sharon Pendlington. So, Sharon is a menopause and nervous system specialist with a decade of clinical experience helping women and gender diverse people to navigate the menopause transition with less stress and more confidence. Sharon specializes in supporting people in midlife to sleep through the night again, stabilize their mood, and restore their sharp mental clarity. Sharon, I really need you. I need you in my own life right now. Um, she's the founder of the 90-Day Perimenopause Nervous System Reset Group, and she works with organizations to create menopause inclusive workplaces. Sharon, welcome to the show. I'm so excited for our conversation today.
I'm excited to be here, Catherine.
Yeah, thank you for being here. And like I was saying, I'm somebody that needs you in my own life as a gender diverse person going through this transition myself. So really excited to learn from you today. And I thought maybe just to start us off, because we will have listeners of all different genders, to the show today. So can you briefly share with those listening and watching that might not have a lot of information about menopause, what the menopausal transition is and how it might impact women and gender diverse people at work in particular?
Yes, of course. So, generally, many people think about it as a reproductive event, but it's actually a whole body neuroendocrine shift. Right? Our hormones regulate just about every system in our body. And when those hormones start to fluctuate and then decline, there's a ripple effect. Right. And so it might show up for someone as sleep disruption, for someone else as anxiety or lower mood, for somebody else as hot flashes or less ability to cope with stress. Certainly, brain fog is common. That difficulty concentrating, memory changes. So it can show up differently, but all of these things can affect our performance at work and our confidence in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So many impacts to the ways that people might be showing up in the workplace. And can you share a few more details? I know, today we're focusing on mental health specifically, but I think about, how this significant transition might be impacting people from a mental health perspective. So thinking about the workplace context as well, like what might people notice and what might colleagues and people around them notice if they're going through this menopausal transition in the workplace related to their mental health and well-being?
So definitely, in terms of what we might notice or what colleagues might notice, might be more irritability, might be what many people notice is it feels like a change, and it might even be perceived by others as a change in your capability, but it's not. It's a change in our capacity. So I would say those are probably the biggest symptoms that show up. Definitely sleep disruption as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, I like
Yeah.
to think about it in relation to what has already previously happened for many people. So, before menopause, 75% of people with ovaries experience premenstrual syndrome. Right? And that it affects the whole body, the mind. But one of the most common symptoms that show up is that those mood changes, the irritability, anxiety, or depression. And it's the exact same hormone changes in perimenopause that are happening, but nobody's talking about it. Yeah, so it's expected. 1 in 3 people are going to experience psychological changes such as anxiety or depression in the menopause transition. And it's not just about, again, it's that ripple effect. I feel like I can't say this enough. It's not just the change in hormones, but there's this ripple effect to our neurotransmitters, right? So GABA, our GABA sensitivity changes, which is our calming neurotransmitter. So maybe this affects our sleep or it can trigger anxiety. And then with a drop in estrogen, that affects our serotonin, our happy hormone. So that's going to, can trigger anxiety or depression or irritability. We see a change in our dopamine, so our ability to even feel pleasure changes, right? As well as dopamine's responsible as well for organization, um, and memory. I had to think about that one. Memory, learning, right? So there's definitely cognitive changes that can be experienced in the menopause transition. Often, this is where many women are and gender diverse people are getting diagnosed with ADHD. Because maybe they already had slightly lower dopamine levels, and now we've got this extra layer on top of it.
I was just going to say 100%. And as you were talking, Sharon, you know what came to mind for me as well is just like thinking about this period of life and when people, are tending to go through, this transition and just the other things that are happening, in their lives in terms of like peak career, peak caregiving. I think about how during this time of life for many people too, like their attachment wounding begins to really get activated and resurface. And at a time when, as you're describing, their nervous systems are being impacted by all of these changes and our ability to emotionally regulate. And so it can be so unsettling. Yeah.
Absolutely. I feel like that could be a conversation in itself, actually. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And, you mentioned our ability to emotionally regulate. Estrogen also determines this. So there's that change too. And then consider all the other things that people may be dealing with, maybe hot flashes, maybe they're having brain fog and that's affecting our confidence, certainly at work. Weight gain is going to affect our confidence. All of this is going to overall affect our emotional wellness. There's so many moving pieces.
Yeah. So, what you're describing is just like a host of different, mental health, nervous system, biological impacts that are happening for people. And you've mentioned how this can impact people's, you know, um, capacity, right? We can kind of like personalize it or take it on, but really there's changes in capacity that are happening. So, I'm wondering if we can turn our attention to, all of this is going on. People are trying to make sense of what's happening for them. What are some of the things that people can do to support? Like I'm thinking about women, gender diverse people going through this transition. What can they do to support themselves?
All that you talk about in your episodes would apply. I mean, you give very practical tools to people. Like you've talked about managing your workload, you've talked about bookending your day. So all these tools, are helpful. Doesn't matter what stage in life that we're at. From my perspective, I think recognizing just how common mood changes are is important, and then advocating for what you need. Right? If you recognize, yeah, my capacity is really changing here. What would support you to continue working, to continue leading? And that's personal responsibility as well as advocating for yourself in the workplace. Certainly, I don't wanna talk too much about this. I'm not a physician, but I work clinically, and so certainly many people find progesterone therapy helpful, especially in early perimenopause. As you get closer to menopause, often estrogen is layered on that to support mood. For milder symptoms, some people find that specific nutrients or herbs can be helpful to support their stress resilience or their sleep or their mood. Uh, I definitely focus on the lifestyle pieces, what we really have control over, and what are we prioritizing? A big one is, are we still prioritizing other people or can we prioritize ourselves? So prioritizing our sleep, our blood sugar regulation, and our stress reduction are all really important for mental health and emotional wellness. And this is going to look different for different people. It might mean more exercise for one person. It might be counseling, cognitive behavioral therapy for another person. It might be mindfulness or breath work or emotional freedom technique or journaling or gratitude or, there's so many different tools available. But I think it comes down to actually prioritizing that and ourselves.
Yeah, what gets in the way of that, Sharon, do you think? 'Cause what I notice in my work is that it can be very hard, for people that identify as women or were socialized, as women, like thinking about gender diverse people, to put themselves first. And this is where, like, I come back to attachment sometimes and like the ways that we learn to minimize our needs, to kind of take up less space in order to care for others. And, that's one of the things that I see sometimes getting in the way of people managing their health. And I'm just wondering, yeah, if that's something that you see in your practice, or if there's other things that kind of get in the way of people really putting themselves first during this time.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak personally as well as what I see with clients that I work with, and what you stated is probably the biggest belief that I see is I'm meant to prioritize others even if it's at my own expense. And of course, we integrate our beliefs based on what we saw and what we learned and what we were told when we were young by primary caregivers. And sometimes those get integrated as beliefs, and there's no problem with that. But we can just start to notice, is this belief still serving me? I mean, I
Yeah.
was never told you're meant to prioritize other people. But I absolutely saw it every day in my mom, right? we, so that's a really strong belief. I see a lot of beliefs around power and powerlessness in women and gender diverse peoples. And so, especially with healthcare, we give our authority away to others very quickly. Oh, tell me what's going on and what I should do about it. Whereas we actually have a lot of the answers ourselves. We may have just been conditioned not to listen as deeply to those as exterior voices. Mhm.
Yeah. Yes, and you mentioned advocacy as being one of those things that can really help, support people during this time. So what does that sound like in the workplace for somebody that is being impacted, by a menopausal transition and is having, like, functioning or health impacts and needs to advocate? Like, what are some of the things that people can say or advocate about on their own behalf that might be helpful?
Yeah, great question. Um, Definitely, I would say organizing a private meeting with your manager, your HR representative, and just being clear that this is, you're having a health issue that's affecting your work and coming with some suggestions. What accommodations would be useful for you? Right? Coming with some solutions, not just the complaint. So, this is what's happening. This is what I would find helpful. Maybe even tracking symptoms that are affecting your performance. Yeah, and having some recommendations in terms of, because often managers and the leadership team are not educated around menopause. They don't, just like you, they also don't have the awareness. So checking your handbook to see what's already available too. Maybe your company already has flexible working hours. And if you're only sleeping, your best sleep is between 7 and 9 a.m., then maybe you can easily start work at 10. Who knows? Right? What would be useful? Do you need to adjust your workload? Do you need to travel less? What would be supportive for you? Yeah, advocating for yourself and then following up that meeting, setting a date to have another meeting to see if those accommodations are working for you.
Yeah, I love that. So following it up and, you were mentioning about this idea of, like, knowing what we need or, really taking the time to kinda understand that and come with that, you come equipped into those conversations with, like, "I think this is what I'm noticing and what would be helpful, for me. And I know, Sharon, that you do a lot of work around mindfulness. And that came to mind immediately when you're talking about kind of like knowing your needs and being able to notice impacts. So I'm wondering if you can share a bit around mindfulness and how, that practice might actually help us if we're kind of navigating this transition or trying to seek accommodations even in the workplace.
Right, yeah. And you use mindfulness in your practice as well. So I'd love to hear your thoughts too, Catherine. For me, I mean, mindfulness allows us to be aware of our capacity, right? And to choose what's the next best step for me. So we can even, like, we could actually close our eyes for a moment and just notice your body right now. Even scanning through the body, noticing what's happening in my jaw, my throat, my shoulders. If there's tension or holding, it's not a problem. Just notice what's here. Seeing what's happening in your belly. Are you holding your breath? Is the breath flowing? What's happening in the pelvis, the hands, the feet? Right? And if there is some tension or holding, these are all signs that we're under capacity, right? We're under resourced. Maybe we're in the stress response. So now what's the best next step for us? Do we need to take a break? We need a drink of water or have something to eat, right? Do we need to get to bed on time tonight? Most of us, we have no idea what our capacity is. We just keep doing, 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 right?
Yeah.
Meeting those expectations from us. And then we can also use mindfulness as a way of grounding ourselves, right? Regulating the nervous system as one tool. So even that quick minute there, you might have noticed, oh, I feel a little bit more centered. Possibly, right? This takes some
I know I
practice.
did.
Really? Yeah. Definitely takes some practice, but it can be used to regulate kind of our cortisol levels throughout the day in the workplace. It's great to have these little 30-second check ins, right? Okay, what's happening now? I'll often even just be going for a walk and I'll notice, why am I holding my belly? It's a beautiful day out. I don't feel like I'm in the stress response, and yet my belly is gripping. I'm like, no, you are in the stress response. What needs to change? So the role of the nervous system definitely isn't talked about enough in the menopause conversation, but we need to remember our hormones regulate almost every system in the body, and our nervous system regulates our hormones. Huh?
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
find that it's so liberating just to name that. In my own personal experience and in my work as a clinician, I feel like sometimes when we don't have the language, right, like to understand what's happening, with us and in us, and when we don't understand our nervous system, and it takes time, right, to be able to understand what our responses are and where they come from and how to support ourselves. But having language around that can be so incredibly helpful, right? Because I think a lot of people feel very alone. They feel like there's something really wrong with them, that it's, this is a personal, individualized issue rather than a transition that many people are navigating and is part of, a human and a life journey. So, thank you for just, giving some language to our listeners today and bringing the nervous system in, because it is really important. And again, we're not alone. There's nothing, um, terribly wrong with us. It's just what our bodies are doing, right? And our nervous systems are doing at this point in our journey. So thanks for that, Sharon.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the resilience piece is important.
Mhm.
So we don't talk about the 20% of people that go through the menopause transition without any symptoms. Right? So not everyone is going to struggle in the menopause transition either. So if we
Mhm.
have the resilience as we go into the menopause transition, and we live in a world that's very high stress. So there's only 20% of us that have that resilience. But it is possible. And this is, I think, where we have a lot of power is how do we look after ourselves sooner in the menopause transition so that we can avoid some of these stronger complaints that can come up.
Yeah, and can you speak a bit about that? Like how we can better resource ourselves, kind of preparing and going into this transition?
Well, definitely tuning into yourself and supporting the nervous system. That like there's physical resilience. That would be a whole other conversation in terms of our metabolism and our blood sugar regulation. But, cognitively, mentally, how do we keep ourselves resourced so that we can adapt to all these changes that are coming down the road for us? The hormone changes, the neurotransmitter changes, all of it. Can we start with as strong of a foundation as possible? And it starts in the hormone changes start in our mid 30s or early 40s. So we're talking 15 years. So we often, I love it if I can speak with younger people that are in their 30s. I'm like, yeah, you are in the prime stage. Really, this is if you can focus on the stress resilience and your emotional wellness now, you could most definitely avoid stronger things later.
Yeah, and you mentioned that, like, talking about it, right? And I'm so encouraged to see, especially I would say in the last couple of years, so many more conversations happening around menopause and education. And I certainly was not well educated, like thinking, into my 30s or doing like that preparation. I'm really hopeful that the conversations, the dialogue, the education that is happening now will better support, people, better prepare people, for what's to come. And so, on that note, Sharon, I also wanted to talk about what employers can do because, we've been talking today about some things that we can be aware of as individuals, maybe some things we want to think about and, how we can kind of prepare ourselves. And so, because this is a health concern, I'm wondering what employers can also be doing um, to better support people that are experiencing, mental health impacts in particular from the menopausal.
Yeah, well, certainly there needs to be more awareness at the individual level, but also at the corporate level. Like leadership managers need to be more aware of what to expect in the menopause transition, as well as workers and employees. So it should be expected that menopause may impact work performance. And this is actually, I would think, this one of the simplest things that businesses can do is have a menopause expert come in to speak to employees, to leadership teams. This is very simple as far as getting more awareness. And then they need to create a culture of openness and talking about it. Because, many people are not comfortable speaking to their manager about this right? Because we haven't been speaking about it. So, normalizing the conversation as soon as possible, even equipping managers with resources so that they can signpost people to resources that would be helpful,
Mhm,
right? And then having those policies in place to
mhm.
support people to continue working, to continue leading. There is this Menopause Works Here playbook that would be a great starting point if a business is not even started to think about how to support people in menopause, then this would be a great starting point.
That's great. And I will make sure that we provide the link to that in the show notes today so people can check out that resource. Um, Sharon, I wanted to ask you, like, because you mentioned the importance of leaders having some information and sensitivity and awareness around menopause, and you mentioned safety, which I think is also really important. And I've been very fortunate in my career; I've had so many great leaders, and I'm aware that there's people listening or watching that might not have had that experience or might not currently have it and are experiencing impacts to their mental health. and they're not really sure, how to talk about it, how to bring it up. So if somebody is not feeling comfortable or safe, are there other things they could consider doing to get support?
So if they're not comfortable bringing up a conversation with their leader,
Leader. Mhm.
I might even suggest directing them to a podcast like this, directing them to, a menopause, the Menopause Association or a website. Even when I go and speak, I generally speak to employee resource groups, and it's almost always comes up that I'm not comfortable talking to a male manager about this, and I said, well, just pass along this recording to them. Um, you might have some other suggestions, Catherine, being in it, because I've never been in the position either of having, being comfortable to talk to management about this. So I'm curious what your perspective would be.
Yeah, I think it is really common, and I love that you mentioned, like, employee resource groups or thinking about, like, where else I can reach out if I don't feel safe and comfortable, like, who else could support me in the workplace? So I always love it, like, as you mentioned, when there's, like, employee resource groups in the workplace or, if there's peer support, programs or other, like, workplace navigation supports that are maybe not your leader that could kinda give you some tips. And I'd be curious on your thoughts on this as well, Sharon. I think about accommodations in general. And, when I think about a menopause inclusive workplace, like my hope is that one day, like we're not still relying on people to do these kind of individual disclosures, right? To get certain supports that they might need, but, I don't think we're there yet in, many of our workplaces. So it's very much seen as like, if you need support, it's on you to advocate or to reach out. But I think about the idea of like how much information. So if you're not comfortable, how much information, you might need to share in order to get an accommodation. Like, could you say something like, I'm going through, a health concern right now. It's temporary, but this is how it's impacting me and this is what I need. So if you're not sure how much information also you want to share, maybe try, that's one thought I have, is maybe try speaking about it generally because, my point of view, it is a health concern. And so, thinking about approaching it that way would be one thing, I think about.
Yeah, great. I love that. And some people will also request a letter from their GP, from their primary care provider, and asking them what they want and do not want included in that letter.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I've also found, it really just takes one leader, even though that person may not be your manager, but one leader that opens up about their experience of
Yeah.
menopause can be really effective, because now people know they can go to that person if they're not comfortable speaking directly to their manager. So there are more menopause champions, peer support, that are trained. And I'm not as familiar, so I can't speak directly about that, but it's certainly is a promising idea.
Yeah. Yeah, to think about, the different support options, right? Because I think sometimes also if people try to get support and it's not successful or they get a negative response, it can really shut them down and, then there's this experience somebody's had of like, this is not a supportive workplace, or I can't talk about it, or I can't get help. So I always encourage people to keep trying, either within their workplace or outside of it, if there's really a lack of safety, to find that support because everybody is certainly deserving of that. That is going through this, this hormonal transition. So Sharon, this has been such a incredible conversation with you. I'm wondering where people can find out more about the services that you offer and the work that you're doing. Again, I think it's so important conversations and education like this. So tell us a bit more about where we can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a good starting point, I offer a complimentary perimenopause archetype quiz, which helps you to see how your nervous system might be connected to your symptoms in the menopause transition. So I'm sure you'll put it in the show notes. You can also find it on my website. It's SharonPendlington.com. And from there, I also offer probably my most popular offering is a small group nervous system reset program that I offer live. And so I have ongoing cohorts of that program. So you can find out more on my website. And I'd be happy to speak with anyone if you need a little bit of support, just help to create a plan for yourself. So I do offer a complimentary clarity call, which you can book through the website as well.
Amazing. Thank you, Sharon. And I'll make sure that all of those links make it into the show notes today. Sharon, do you have any final words for people listening and watching out there?
Maybe just that we often talk about the symptoms and the complaints and how it affects us, but just that invitation to see menopause as a time of tuning into our own inner wisdom and a time of empowerment, and that often these symptoms that we're having are really messages from our body that something isn't working for us, something needs to change. Right? Often it's signaling to us that we need to notice our changing capacity and honoring ourselves. That self-kindness piece is really important.
Yeah, self-compassion goes a long way, in this journey and in that self-support. And I just want to thank you, Sharon, for your generosity in coming on the show and sharing this valuable information with us. I'll make sure that those resources make it into the show notes and just encourage anybody listening or watching out there. That's found value in this conversation today to share it with somebody who might need to hear this information, to share it in your workplace, just so, again, we can begin normalizing these types of conversations. Thank you again, Sharon, and thanks for everybody listening and watching out there. We'll see you back here next time. Thanks for listening today. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only and is not medical advice or mental health treatment. If you're struggling at work, please reach out to the supports within your workplace or community. This podcast was gratefully recorded on the unceded and ancestral homelands of the Lekwungen-speaking people of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations.